Okay, so welcome to our second week of our Theory of Change module. Before we do begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I join you from today, the people of the Kulin Nation, who have a deep understanding of learning and teaching themselves. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands you're joining us from today and any First Nations people on the call, and pay my respect to their elders past and present too. So for those who weren't able to participate in last week's session or any of the sessions before, if we haven't met, my name is Keisha and I am Clear Horizon Academy's Learning Experience Coordinator, as well as a consultant at Clear Horizon. So in today's session, we're going to bring this week's learning content into practice with Caitlin, going through some of the steps of how to build a theory of change for the Castleman 500 example. And you will have the opportunity to share your insights and how you may have approached the task differently or ask questions on what you're still uncertain about. So if you've done the activity in this week's content, it's very similar to that, but we're just going to be building it together as a group. So just a bit of housekeeping as normal, just keep yourself on mute except when speaking, and use the chat box or the raise hand function in the participants box down the bottom if you would like to communicate something to the broader group or to Caitlin or myself as well. We are recording the session today for those who can't make it, and we'll only be recording the plenary sessions, so not the breakout groups. Before we do go ahead, there was just a question that came through I think yesterday, just about the assignment submission for next week, just in terms of your working on your own group assignments. Just make sure that that title page just has all of your names on it, and get one person from your group to upload the assignment. So we're not getting, 45 of the same assignments and trying to figure out which one's the most relevant version to look at. So if you can get someone to nominate in your group, that would be great. So the agenda for today, Caitlin's just going to take us through a step-by-step of how to build a theory of change for the Castlemaine 500 example. And don't worry if you haven't got around to the example or the activity yet this week too. So we'll help you with this process. And then we'll go into breakout groups towards the end of the session to discuss what you've learned and see if you still have any questions that need clarifying. Alrighty, so we might get started. I'm just going to share my screen. Does anyone have any questions before we do go ahead with the activity this week? Any kind of logistical issues or anything else that you're wanting to be aware of? Going to take silence as a good thing. Okay, so we're going to walk through how you would develop your broader goals and end of program outcomes first, before then looking at the activities and developing the intermediate outcomes. So that missing middle bit that we were talking about with the car park activity last week. All right. So I'm just going to jump. So you would have seen this in the text for this week. So the steps of understanding a theory of change. So doing the pre-work, so understanding the needs and the context, what problem or issue you're trying to solve here. And then from there, clarifying your end of program outcomes and broader goals, and then identifying your intermediate outcomes and considering your influence activities. Usually those happen at the same time. So your broader goals, just as a bit of a recap, the things that you're looking to contribute towards. So they can be quite high level, very, very broad outcomes. I've seen, I think I was mentioned to the group I was with last week, you can include things like sustainable development goals as a broader goal. It's something that you're trying to aim towards. But the end of program outcome is what your program or initiative is trying to uniquely contribute to. So what's your contribution to that? So just jumping down, does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? No, I'm seeing some shaking of heads, thank you. So we're looking at the scope. So hopefully this slide will be a bit familiar to you with the PowerPoint that you have this week. We've gone through the liberty of pre-filling it out so we don't have to go through it in a bit of a discussion. But looking at that Castlemaine 500 example, actually, is this big enough? Can people read what is on here? Yes, no, I might just.
I can, Keisha, but it's always good. Oh, yep,
Is that better?
that's bigger. Yep.
Okay,
How
great.
is it for others? It's always hard.
Is that okay for everyone else? Yep.
It cuts out the far right of the screen, but at this point it doesn't matter, but maybe later when we go to the other graphs it might.
Great. Thanks for flagging. Okay, so we're going to just as a bit of a recap. So the Castlemaine 500 project was in the city of Castlemaine in Victoria, as you will have been aware. The timeline, so it was a pilot project. So the timeline is 2 years for when they're trying to see those outcomes and changes to occur. And the whole project was $500,000 with a small team of 3 people to be able to deliver this project. So what they're trying to say is that the problem that or the issue that they're trying to solve is that greenhouse emissions are the highest per capita in Australia and the highest in Victoria, or they were at the time. Unsure what they are now. And local residents are really keen and active in this area in terms of trying to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So the desired future state for the initiative, so, you know, what would success look like? From the videos that you would have seen, that around 500 households would reduce their energy consumption by 20%, that they would continue on, so an element of sustainability, that they would continue on after the 2 years post the pilot program. And then that they would create a model for household energy reduction that could be scaled out. So the idea of a pilot is that you're just trying it in one area and trying to see if it would work in other areas similar or even slightly different too. And that the project would be owned, so that after the project did finish, that the community would take over. So there wouldn't need to be necessarily any major extra funding for that, for those activities to kind of continue. So with that in mind, I might hand it over to Caitlin now, just to start talking about building those broader goals and end of program outcomes. And I'll kind of be in the background just typing away at what your suggestions are. Thanks, Caitlin.
Great, thank you, Keisha. And did anyone have any questions about the scope that Keisha has just chatted through there? Anyone saw that the project was about something very, very different? And you'll have to be my eyes, Keisha, because just making sure we can try and see.
Can I ask a question? It's Peter here.
Yep.
So how do you come up with your percentage of reduction? Like, is that based on any research or evidence, or is that pulled out of the air? I feel like in the other example, I wasn't quite sure how you set those targets when you put numbers to them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it will depend project by project. My understanding was this one was based on research of what, you know, what is a, it was quite an ambitious target, I think, of what was reasonable if they put these things in place. But that's one of the beauties of pilots, is you can say, was that a way too high, way too ambitious target? How do we go? You know, you do, and we'll talk about when you get into further modules, you can talk about stretch targets, hurdle targets, how you set them, is it done in collaboration, how do you, all those measurement questions, they tend to come later. So what you would have noticed is it as outcome statements. We don't write them as targets. Write the outcome, and then a separate step is setting up indicators, the targets, all of that. But it's a great question, and it can take a lot of work. Sometimes they are very, very arbitrary targets, and sometimes they set them up to fail, and sometimes they're very easy to be gamed. So I don't know whether you guys know the scenario where they said they didn't want people to be waiting in hospital waiting rooms for more than 2 hours. So they were putting them on beds, and so the hallways were filled the halls were filled. So they met their target, but of course it wasn't a good outcome. So that's why you always make sure the outcome is written as an end state of the experience you want people to go through. Yeah, so I hope that explains it, Peter. Big answer is it depends. Lovely. Any other broader questions about the scope or the Castlemaine 500 question in general, project in general? No? Okay, we could have the next slide, Keisha. And yeah, that's great. Can everyone see that? Yeah, that might be better. Making sure that it's fitting on the screen. How did you guys go? I do appreciate it's pretty busy at the moment, so maybe not everyone actually got to write this down in their workbooks. That's why we're going to step it through together. But I'd really welcome, and please just take yourself off mute and call out or put it in the chat function if you'd like. What were some of the broader goals that you identified? And I'll just see if I can bring up the chat function in case people are adding the stuff in.
Sorry, Diane, you've taken yourself off mute.
Yeah, I don't know if this is too big, but I've written reduction in emissions levels across the state of Victoria.
Fantastic. Yes, that is definitely a broader goal. And as we explained in last week's training on the LMS, broader goals are great because you don't have to be accountable for them directly. You're contributing, but of course this one project on its own wouldn't be able to create a measurable reduction in greenhouse gas emissions across Victoria. That's too ambitious. That's beyond the end of program outcomes, but you're contributing to it. And so it's really nice to capture that one. Yeah, that's a great one. And we could also think slightly smaller in terms of less greenhouse emissions and think where this project is located. So we've got the broader Victoria. Yep, so you might want to also consider less greenhouse emissions from Castlemaine. Of course, this project isn't the only one. And we've got a great one come through from Joanna in the chat function: increase community awareness and responsibility to reduce energy consumption. Yeah, absolutely. So that, and let's have a chat about whether that's actually, is that something that we'd like to have as an end of program outcome? Because it depends how we state it, isn't it? Definitely at that broader goal level, you could say that it's, you know, as a community, not just all participants. So at the project participant level, you would put that end of program outcome of increased awareness and reducing emissions. But they really, a broader goal was to really spread that messaging and awareness. So that, yeah, have a think about how we might phrase that at the broader goal level. Yep, actually, Adam's got it really nicely. Surrounding towns are inspired and lower their household energy consumption. That's a great one. That's definitely at the broader goal. Yep, and we've got here reduction in energy costs for consumers involved in the program. And that might actually end up being an end of program outcome. We can have a chat. It's always good. What I tend to do is just do placeholders. Drop it down because they're really great ones, and then you can decide where they actually sit. Alicia at Castlemaine will have embedded a lower energy consumption rate in their everyday practice. Yeah, so once again, we can split how we write that. Castlemaine in general, that belongs in the broader goals, and you could have it more specifically about the participants. The project participants have a lower energy consumption rate. That's much more appropriate at the end of program outcome level. Yep, financial savings to customers. That is a nice one. You can absolutely throw that one in. Yep, and that how you write it, once again, it could go at broader goal or end of program. Just make sure that it's really targeted to the participants if it's at the end of program. Individual behaviour change. Yeah, what would be good is if we make that even more specific, like what's specific. So it's energy saving behaviour change. Embed new practices and behaviours related to energy consumption. Perfect. Desi's got that one. Increase use of sustainable energy sources. That you could definitely have that as a broader goal. And community leaders build on the energy saving outcomes into the future. Yeah, that's a great one, Adam. They really wanted that sustainability and that the project to be ongoing. Yeah. Yeah, they're fantastic, guys. They're really good. And look, you can keep going. There is an art to knowing when's enough. So what we tend to do often when I'm drafting logics, you know, start with more and then you kick out some that are less priorities. You really focus on the priority ones. But at that broader goal, there's no restrictions. You really don't have to have like a set number. It's just what's appropriate for your program. Great. Does anyone have any questions about writing broader goals? How did you all feel about that? Yep, no issues. It came fairly naturally. It is nice when you've read the case study. What's harder is when you are designing the program. And so those broader goals, those end of program outcomes are still up for debate. That's when creating the program logics can take longer, slower, but very, very important phase.
I think, sorry, with me, Caitlin, it's just easier to talk than type. I went too broad, so I extended it out to have for changes to be nationwide rather than just the state. So, but yeah, definitely too big. But that was
no, you know what? That's actually not necessarily wrong. You could absolutely, you know, hope to contribute to that. What I'd want to see is just making sure there are some mechanisms in your activities that when you're disseminating all the information and you're expecting that influence, that it is broader than just Victoria. How will you get that spread across states and across Australia? That's all. Yeah, you just build it into your program design. So yeah, but it's not unreasonable to expect that, you know, perhaps some Victorians on the border between South Australia and New South Wales, that there might be some information sharing there. So that, yeah, I would never want to say that's wrong. So yeah, but it is that happy balance.
I also just add in there as well that sometimes the broader goals, particularly if you are in an organisation, they could be the organisational strategic goals too, so that your project's trying to contribute to an element, like it's not going to contribute totally to that strategic goal. There are probably multiple projects trying to strive for the same thing, but that broader goal could be like at an organisational broader level too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Keisha. Often you already have some broader goals that you want to demonstrate how you're contributing to them. So let's put our attention to writing out the end of program outcomes. How did you guys go with that? I'd love to hear, and by all means you can take yourself off mute and talk or put it in the chat function, whatever suits you. We've already got 2 end of program outcomes here: reduction in energy costs for consumers who are involved in the program, and that's what we want to differentiate. That you within, remember from last week when we're really talking about that sphere of influence, sphere of versus sphere of interest. So broader goals is sphere of interest, sphere of influence is end of program outcomes. You can really have a direct contribution there. And now I need to remember where the cutoff was for Okay, great. Yep, so Adam's put in Castlemaine community are well informed and educated in energy saving practices. Yep, and so what I would want to put there is the, I'd probably try and contain it to the participants. It might be a bit unreasonable to expect direct attribution for the whole of the Castlemaine community, since it was just 500 households. Yeah, you don't want to set yourself up to fail, but you could always make sure that it's captured in the broader goals, the broader community. Increase community awareness of how to reduce energy consumption in the 500 homes. Yeah, absolutely. Let's make sure we've captured that. Yep, so reduced energy costs and then also reduced energy use. Yep. Yep, community leaders build on the energy saving outcomes into the future. Yes, that was definitely what we wanted to see. We really wanted to see direct uptake by the local partners and businesses. Yes, educated leaders spread knowledge to other local towns. That was definitely something that is within the sphere of influence and expected outcome of the program. Yeah, group of influencers are created. Yeah, perfect. And there was another one there. It does link, because we could sort of see a couple of different pathways, and this is another thing that we tend, it's often starts emerging in our logic models. It doesn't always fall out that way, but where we have stakeholder groups and how we expect them to act or their behaviour to change, we can actually stream that into different columns or different pathways of change. So what can start to emerge, and we'll do that in the next step. So we're just brainstorming the broader goals and the end of program outcomes here, but when we start building the logic model, we can see what are some pathways that are really starting to emerge. So the one pathway that we might want to articulate a little bit more is how we wanted the local businesses and partners to act. Because we've got the leadership structure and they're the people who are like train the trainers, training people. We've got the residents and how we want them to act, but then there's also things, an end of program outcome that we wanted from the local businesses. Okay, thanks, Keisha. We so end of program outcome for the local businesses and partners was that their opportunities are created to make it easier for households to access energy efficient appliances and other support. That was something that came through in the case study. Keisha is reminding me that we're running out of time, so I'll jump down to the logic model and starting to build it. Energy providers offer more sustainable options. Yeah, that one might end up having to be at the broader goal level. Yeah, because with solar, yeah, so we'll just make sure we contained it there. Lovely. Okay, so Keisha's got a very tricky job of trying to bring stuff across, but what we can actually do is jump down to the next slide.
Just for the sake of time, I might just do it in this one here.
Yeah, no worries at all. Yep, I think that's a great idea. So Keisha will be busy bringing those across, so we'll try not to be too distracted there. Let's talk about some of those intermediate outcomes, and let's talk about the pathways. And if, Keisha, are we running out of time? Would you like me to just do one of the pathways, step it through?
Probably, yeah, just one of the pathways. So if you wanted to focus on one end of program outcome, that'd be good.
Yeah, sure. Do people have a choice, a preference? Because we sort of saw, and there's no right or wrong, we sort of saw there were three pathways of change. We saw that there was the leaders and holding the leadership workshops and how change was expected to occur for that group. The households, what happens there, that might be a nice one to focus on. And then the networking and communications with the businesses, so the partners, the local businesses, that's another one. So are people okay with focus on the households? Yep, we'll just jump in. So what we had is, I might even, when you've already got, there was some discussion on the LMS actually about when you start with activities, when you jump down from end of project outcomes to activities, and when you work down. Since this is a case study, we already know the activities. There's no, no surprises. So we can quite comfortably put in as the activity that there's going to be household assessments, energy assessments, and the leaders were going to work with the households. So we can put that in. And they were 2 activities that were going to occur directly with. And as a result of that, we were going to see 500 households develop energy action plans, energy reduction action plans. And what I'd love you guys to do is to step through the intermediate outcomes. There's about maybe 2 there. What do you think in terms of we know the end of program outcome is that less energy is used in those 500 houses. What would be an intermediate outcome? We had a couple of examples this week in the LMS and people really liked this, where it was actually you're gaining knowledge, you're gaining insight, increase awareness. So often we have as a first step, residents start implementing changes. Yeah, absolutely. And so what we might even do is make that the next one up, actually. If you flip that one up, there's 1 step in between. We just want to make sure there's no miracle leaps. So yeah, absolutely. And Christine, I see that you put replace or buy more energy efficient appliances. Absolutely. I'd put that up with the residents start implementing changes. That's exactly right. Yep, all the actual door stoppers, the tinted windows, they change the energy practices. And in terms of behavior change, because human behavior change is quite tricky, we normally just make sure word starts to spread amongst the residents. That's very true. That is something that we would want to see. Yes, Lauren, you're right on the right track there. It's awareness raising. They're aware of their current energy use. They suddenly become aware of how to reduce. Yep, talk to each other about how they are saving energy. Perfect. You guys have nailed it. It's that really they've increased their skills and knowledge and awareness. That's that missing step. You can step them out even further if you want in terms of complex behavior change outcomes. But for this case, we'll just say that it's that increased awareness and knowledge. And we did have a great question, Dave. I think you were keen to understand more about the pathways. Is that right? The streams, when I talked about the 3 streams, is that what you wanted to have some clarity on, David?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's become a lot more clear as you've talked through. When you were naming the pathways, I thought, oh, why those ones? But now I get it. So thanks.
Okay, that's good. Lovely. And Keisha, how am I for time? Have we got any time for questions about this, or do we need to move on? Yep.
No, I've got time for questions. Thanks.
Okay. So you'll notice that, of course, there's the 2 other pathways that we could build out. Some of you have probably already done that in your workbooks. Any questions about that?
I'm curious to know actually if there are no questions, or if there are, if anyone if you did do the exercise, if you did it differently, and if so, how? Because there are so many ways that you could develop a theory of change. This is only one way, but yeah, just interested to see if anyone took another stab a different way.
Good question. my group worked along these lines. Phew. Well done, Sue. Good. And like I said, how you actually write the end of all the different outcomes, it can really vary. You can have lots, you go really minimal. It's just trial and error. Yeah. Was there anything that we sort of put up here that people are really questioning, or they're just like, I don't get it? Just let me know. And it was really good to read in the LMS discussion, the forums, about the different methods that had been raised. You know, the top down, bottom up, really go to research, have discussions. I think some people raised that they used all methods. That's really common. That's good. We like that. That really helps to make sure that you're not missing things. So it really is personal preference. And dependent on the project too. Sometimes there isn't that good set of literature and academic research on how this behaviour change is expected to occur. So you really are piloting. It's very innovative. Okay, and feel free to loop back if you've got some questions that arise later. We're going to go into breakout groups. Is that right, Keisha? I'll let you lead that one.
Sure. Excuse me. So we're just going to jump into breakout groups now. It might be a bit intimidating. There are 40 people on this call. So just kind of wanting to understand any light bulb moments or insights that you had either doing this activity on your own or in the session so far today, or what you're still unsure about, or any questions. If you have already worked with your groups on this activity for your own work-based project, and you're getting a bit stuck, or you've had some light bulb moments with your team, it would be really great to be shared. You're not necessarily going to be in a group with your team, so it's just more of a broader discussion. So we'll be in those groups for about 5-10 minutes and then come back together and have a bit of a reflection with everybody.
And Keisha, those questions won't be up in the groups, will they? So if people just take note of, there's 2 questions to discuss. What are your light bulb moments or insights? And that can be for this particular activity we've just done together in the shoot, or it can be for your project. And what are you still unsure about? Yeah.
I'll just put them in the chat there if anyone needs a reference.
Okay.
All right, I'll open the breakout groups now and we'll see you in about 5-10. Thanks. Back by now, just waiting on a few groups. We must be having a really in-depth conversation. Okay, all right, everyone should be back now. Caitlin, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Keisha. Before we dive into feedback from the breakout groups, Jessica had put up a really good chat question or comment where she says her experience of doing the Castlemaine 500 was similar but different, and she's concerned about breaking down the intermediate outcomes and knowing if you have broken it down in small enough parts. That is a great insight and a really good comment. There is no right or wrong. It's just really questioning, and that's why I like to use the different methods of top down, bottom up, looking at really going, if possible, looking at the literature for behaviour change programs, which so many projects and programs are focused on. Really, it's quite complex, and you can break it down into lots and lots of steps. Something that you can do to avoid having 20 intermediate outcomes, and we will talk about this next week in the LMS, is having an accompanying narrative. So that you can strike that balance that way between, you want your logic model to be simple enough to be understood and explained, but complex enough to really make sure there's no big missing pieces and miracle leaps. And the narrative is a great way to supplement that. So we'll touch on that next week. I hope that's an okay explanation, Jessica. Yep, awesome, thumbs up, thanks. Let's jump in. We had 8 breakout groups, and just because of time, we won't be able to hear from everyone. Do we have some volunteers? Take yourself off mute and feel free to talk about the 2 components. Were there any light bulb moments or insights or things you're still unsure about? We'll need some brave volunteers. Otherwise, I'm just going to be mean and start picking.
I'm going to say one.
Awesome.
I was going to say, we talked about struggling with the language because this language is very unfamiliar to us.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear the language, I don't understand what you're talking about. But when I see the graphics, it makes good sense. So it actually gives me the confidence that I actually know what you're talking about. I'm just talking another language to you.
Yep. Yeah, that's very common, Sue. And look, I will, you know, for the sake of this course, it would be wonderful if we could keep to the terminology, broader goals, end of project program outcomes. So is that the language you're talking about?
Yeah, because there's lots of language. There's lots of very unfamiliar language.
Yes.
And then there's multiple language for the same thing.
Yes. Yes.
So we've been throwing several. Yeah, and so some of us are struggling with that.
Yeah.
And so then I feel like I'm not capable of doing it. But then I see the graphics. I think, well, that's totally easy. You're just writing notes up on a butcher's paper. We're just throwing ideas on the wall.
Great. And something that I really encourage you guys collectively, as Hume Council, you guys who have done this course, to decide on your own language that suits you. And that's where it links in really beautifully with your project management language. What I noticed on the forum is most people said it's reasonably familiar. If there's things that are jarring you, you know the hierarchy, as you said. Once you've seen it in diagrammatic form, you can say, okay, actually we call these goals or visions or aims or something, you know, that's fine. You adjust it, but you know what that level's meant to be. So that's something you guys can definitely go and own and tweak to make it suit you. And sometimes it is just an annoying case of just becoming more familiar with it. It's up to you. Any other, thank you for being brave and going, speaking up, Sue. Anyone else like to volunteer? Any light bulb moments, things you're still unsure about, questions?
Our team, sorry, the team, my team, we were just saying that one of the key sort of light bulb moments was that the intermediate outcomes, that it really forces people to think and break it down, whereas in, you know, day-to-day practice, staff often just go straight to the activity or just go goal activity and don't look at those steps in between.
You're absolutely right, Cecilia. That is so common. We see that time and time again. And I think there were some great comments on the LMS actually, where then come time to measure the success or the impact of your project, you either have to wait 3 years and to try and measure this, and you've waited a long time. Really stepping out those intermediate outcomes can check, are you on the right track? Are there changes that are needed? I really loved reading through those comments. They were great. They were great insights by you guys collectively. So well done. Any others?
We just talked about, I guess, the importance of throwing everything into it and then refining it, which is something you said, you know, don't edit it as you're doing it, but just get it all in there. And then, you know, especially because we're learning, you know, and then you can kind of clean it up afterwards. And also probably taking some space, you know, in the process of developing it. Don't just think you're going to sit down one afternoon and knock it over.
Great insight, Peter. That's the way I advocate. Of course, everyone's different, but I really, you can have that sort of analysis paralysis where nothing's good enough and you can't get the wording right. Get down the main point. What's the, you know, the crux of your outcome? What's the main point? Just placeholders. You can then shuffle them. You can tweak the wording. I do find that sometimes people get way too stuck. They spend an hour trying to get the wording of one outcome. It really gets you too stuck, and you do that later. And as you said, take time out, come back with fresh eyes. It's amazing what you can see the next day, or, you know, even a couple of hours later. Yeah, so thanks for that contribution. Have we got time for one more comment, Keisha, before we, anyone else?
We've got time for a couple more, yeah.
Couple more, great. I can be mean and start picking people.
I've got a question for anyone, just in terms of, did anyone try and do the Castlemaine example themselves and then try with your team, and what the difference is with that? I'm just kind of curious to see if people were able to, you know, if they struggled either doing it with the team, trying to come to consensus, or struggled trying to think of how change occurs by themselves. Just, yeah, any reflections on that?
I've just got a query about
that. I
that. Our team is meeting after these sessions, so I'm not quite sure what the sequence is supposed to be. We're supposed to meet before the weekly session and work through whatever the questions are or tasks.
I think it's up to you, but it is always good to have a bit of a crack with the tasks on your own, and then when you're with your group, you're kind of focusing on your group-based project. But obviously there are some people who will meet beforehand and have had a bit of a crack as well. So yeah, whatever works for you.
And Anna, you had a comment?
If there's time, yeah. I just wanted to say it's an interesting point to map it out as individuals and then sit down together. So only one of our arts and culture team has actually had time to complete the whole Castlemaine study, but we were trying to kind of delegate a bit to get through the workload and do it as a team. So he, in looking at the way he's done it, it's really raised that issue of how much is the right level of detail, and highlighted those challenges of sometimes tying things down as a group of people with different brains, you know, the way you've interpreted something, and how I guess my main point is that it's important to actually have time to really thrash those things through, rather than assume that everyone's going to have the same vision straight away. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's something, you've raised a good point there, Anna. We really advocate doing program logic in a participatory way, doing it collaboratively. But of course, as soon as you've got different brains, different ideas, different insights, it's harder. It really is. Sometimes it is easier to just lock yourself away in a room and do it yourself. But that's not the point. The main thing is getting everyone's insights, having your own views challenged. What have I missed? But of course, it makes it more challenging, more frustrating sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes, but recognizing that, being okay, and definitely more time consuming. So build all that in. Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, Anna. And Keisha, have we well and truly run out of time now? Did you want to set us up for next week?
Yeah, I think so. Before we do, I just wanted to add onto that as well. A person at Clear Horizon used to work in a government agency, and she tells this story all the time, where she locked herself in a room and did a theory of change for a project that she was working on, and then went to go show her director, and the director was like, no, this is not how it works. Like, you've got to consider X, Y, Z. Like, why is this bit here? Or how do you expect to jump from here to here? So really testing it out with other people who either need to contribute or are involved in the program or the project is quite necessary. It can be tricky. And also, you know, make sure that you're never going to get it perfect where everyone is going to agree. So getting it to about 80-90% perfect for everyone, you're happy to walk away with it, and, you know, it's okay for now. And then you can continue changing and reiterating it. Never laminate it. It will change over time.
Yep. Can you live with it, and don't laminate it? It's going to be dynamic.
That's right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions today. I hope you found that helpful, just really stepping that out. And it was good to get all of your engagement and insights there. So thank you for contributing. Next week's virtual session is going to be very more relaxed. We're not going to do an activity, but it's just going to be a Q&A session. So make sure that you bring all of your questions. If there's any questions if you meet with your groups either this week or next week, and you're kind of grappling with something about your work-based projects, please feel free to bring them across. And we'll be able to nut it out together as a group. Perhaps some other people who aren't in your group will be able to contribute to some insights there as well about how they were able to tackle it too. So make sure that you come prepared with some questions, and we'll open up the floor for that. And next week's content is looking at principles and assumptions and how to really test your narrative, your theory of change and your narrative as you go along. And at the end of next week, so once your assignment is submitted, if you choose to submit, we won't really be touching on developing the theory of change any longer. So just make sure that at the end of next week, you're happy to be hands off and walk away from it, and just be comfortable for the sake of for the rest of the modules on how to use that. So just kind of wanted to flag that there. With the last 60 seconds or so, does anyone have any questions about that? Just about the next steps? Otherwise, the content will be released, just for the sake of the public holiday tomorrow, the content will be released at 5 p.m. today. So it'll be a little bit earlier. Sorry, Cecilia, you're on mute if you're trying to comment.
Just to clarify, the working group's got to finish our theory of change template, like populate it for our project by the end of next week.
So the assignment due date, I believe, is I can't remember, to be honest, if it's the end of next week or the week after, but it will be in Rav's email this afternoon. Just on what the due date will be. So, but just make sure that when you finish the content by the end of next week, that you're happy with it and you're happy to walk away, because we'll be moving on to building a measurement framework the week after.
But this is the template that will circulate, filling that in.
That's right, for your project, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. Just because we're meeting this afternoon to get clarity about what we're working on.
Sure, no problems. Great. All right, without further ado, have a great week. If you are having a long weekend, please enjoy it. Go Tigers or Cats, whoever you follow. And yeah, we'll see you next Thursday.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.